سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. سبحانك لا فهم لنا إلا ما فهمتنا إنك أنت الجواد الكريم. وقل رب زدني علما. So continuing with the discussion about dunya, which in the Islamic perspective generally leaves a sort of sour taste. Dunya, when we think of weird dunya, the low and the despicable. However, sometimes our perception our perception of the reality of dunya could be skewed and not really balanced. And so therefore, in this chapter, what is being discussed here is what is the reality of dunya, the blameworthy of it and the praiseworthy of it. It's not all, we're here in this dunya, so it's all just a mess. It's all just fitna and, and lowliness. And, you have certain individuals that have really sort of lost, the real meaning of all of this. And some of the monastic practices of some of the disciplines, religious disciplines, have gone overboard in these areas. Even some of our own Muslim people have kind of lost their track in this regard. So when we hear about, and of course, the previous chapter was called Dhamm ad-Dunya, the blameworthiness and sort of the despicability, if you will, of the dunya. So what do we mean by the dunya? What is blameworthy and what is praiseworthy? Is there anything good about dunya? Well, yes, there is. So when people hear about this, they think that what is despicable about dunya are the things which have been created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for our benefit. The earth itself is created for our benefit. He's created for you everything in the earth. Everything here, it's for us. There are things that we need to eat. There are things that, we have spouses for procreation and finding, affection and solace and so many things that we mentioned in other places when we talked about marital relations. What a beautiful thing. Similarly, our clothing, خُذُوا زِينَتَكُمْ عِنْدَ كُلِّ مَسْجِدٍ, we are, that's part of the nobility of humanity that we have. We dress ourselves, we cover ourselves. The rest of the animals, they just walk around as they were created, right? So these are not blameworthy things. These are actually, they are good things. They are manafia. They are benefits which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created. So it's not those things which are cursed. It's something else. We need to understand that. So some people didn't understand that, so they just turned away totally. This monasticism, Rahbaniya, which is also mentioned in Surah Hadid, that we hadn't, put that monasticism upon them. The monks sort of came up with this from their own, it was their own idea, and their idea was that since man tends to be sidetracked from his objective and caught in the snare of the worldly temptations and pleasures and, of money, women, lands, property, crops. So better just to leave it all. And so then you have among the monks in this monasticism, you have celibacy. They don't marry. They don't even have houses. And they say that, Isa alayhi salam didn't marry, he didn't have a house. Well, that was peculiar to him, and there was a specific hikmah, for all of that. But that's not, that's not the ideal for everybody. And the ideal for everybody was shown by Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who married, he ate, and he clothed, and he had a roof over his head, albeit according to necessity. So it's not the things themselves which are accursed. As we mentioned earlier, the dunya is cursed. Everything and in it, except what is connected to the dhikr of Allah, dhikr and dhikr, connected to the dhikr of Allah, and a scholar and a student. So to further elucidate this, and we probably mentioned it, other places as well, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put it it's in the nature, human nature, that He has this desire for what, brings about the sustenance and the sort of continuation of the nafs. Nafs, the physical body, it has needs. And so intrinsically we have desire for those needs, and that keeps us alive. And if those weren't there, then that would probably be the end of the human species. Even the attraction to the opposite sex is something which needs to be there. Otherwise, as we've mentioned, probably who would really undergo all of those difficulties of marriage and spend expenditure and looking after kids, and it's a very huge responsibility. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it such that we have to have that. And so the nafs wants that kind of thing. It feels hunger. It feels, the various things. And so it desires those things which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, those desires to be fulfilled in an appropriate way. So those who totally deny all of these things, they actually have not understood nafs in its total reality. And so those who have just totally rejected the world and everything in it, this is not the point, This is not in fact, it's not the prophetic example. So here it's mentioned that the world is actually, that we live in, it is a conglomeration of various things, and which we mentioned earlier are created for the human being. And so whether it's food, whether it's clothing, whether it's spouses, so it's like, the person who has, like the people who are going, in the old days, they used to go to Hajj on the camels, right? And so the camel is also a thing of the dunya, right? And he has to eat, and the camel has to, have, things, to sustain it. So if someone, just denied this camel of its food and its drink and its, then what would happen? You wouldn't reach for Hajj, or you would have a very difficult time. So we also have, this body is the vehicle in which we are moving through this worldly presence, which is a test and a trial. But this body is our vehicle that's taking us on the journey. So we have to respect it, and we have to protect it, and we have to honor it, in fact. It's very interesting. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned that man kana lahu sha'r falyukrimhu. If somebody has hair, he should honor it. Leaving your hair all disheveled, that's not the prophetic example. And to have a mirror, every 5 minutes, and that's overdoing it, So where is the reality is the balance. It's the balance, right? So if we understand, that if we understand that these things have been created for the man to facilitate him in his journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because his physical body has physical requirements. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his mercy has made those physical requirements available, not only available, but enjoyable. And, tasty and so if we utilize those things to facilitate our life of worship and our life of ubudi and obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that amount of dunya that we will be using, whether it's money, whether it's property, whether it's spouses, whether it's children, whether it's agricultural lands, whether it's business, whether it's government, whatever it is, if we're using it in that context, to the extent that it keeps us moving in the right direction, or we're using it with balance, then that's going to be praiseworthy, right? Therefore, Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah is a famous saying. He says, "Ni'ma mal as-salih fi yad al-abd as-salih." He says, what a great ni'mat is pious money, pious money, which is in the hand of a pious person, because he uses it for pious objectives. Now, if one turns his attention from the actual objective and really gets caught up, in this, in all of those things, which otherwise were just created to sustain us, but sustain us in an enjoyable fashion, in a pleasant, enjoyable fashion. But if we get carried away with that and lose our focus from the objective to the, like the person, again, back to the analogy of the camel and the pilgrims in Hajj. Now suppose, on the way, someone gets down with this camel, and he takes the camel to the water hole, and then, the camels also, they wear saddles, and they have saddle blankets and the like, right? So he says, well, let me try this saddle, let me try this saddle blanket, let me try this. And he's, adorning his camel with all of these. In the meantime, the rest of the caravan takes off, and he's left alone, as a, as a morsel for the wild beasts in the jungle, right? So yes, water your camel and then continue with the journey. You see. So similarly, if we lose focus of what our objective is, and we get which is what the world is now, and why we have so much travail in the world, because we've lost our objective, and now it's about what I eat. It's not even about eating for eating is fuel for ibadah, right? We eat because that's the fuel of this machine of this body, which is to produce good action. But we've forgotten that, and now eating is about enjoyment. Those of our brothers and perhaps sisters are with us from Pakistan. It's like maza yani, right? Is it enjoyable or not? Well, enjoyable in what sense? It tastes good. It might be destroying us. It might be putting us in early graves. It might be producing, heart disease and every other thing. But it's tasty. So good and wholesome things are also tasty, by the way, But so if we get carried away with that, and we are in the pursuit of pleasure in the utilization of these resources, and forget the fact that they are simply resources to carry us along on the journey, then that's when these same things become cursed, because they're a means of distraction to us. So it's not actually the world and the things of the world, the materials of the world are cursed. It is the characteristics of the human being who uses it and how he uses it. That's where the curse comes. Is this clear? So, and in fact, our pious ancestors, our Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam himself, taking him as the first and foremost example, he would go hungry for days and days. He wasn't running after, in pursuit of sustenance, of earning. But when it came to his lot, he would enjoy it. He was particularly fond of the front leg of the goat. And a very interesting story that it's a very sound hadith that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, when the pot was cooking in it, actually the sheep or the goat was cooking, and so he said, so give me the foreleg. So one was given to him. He said, give me another. Another was given. He said, give me another. He said, Ya Rasulullah, the goat has only 2 forelegs. He said, if you wouldn't have said that, you would have kept taking out forelegs, until the day of judgment. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam liked those things. He used to like sweets. But those sweets were not, the sweets like today, which just totally destroy your health. Sweet in those days was honey. That's what they had. Honey, And they might mix honey with, generally they would take honey and they would mix it with water. And that was a great thing. And so, for the moment, we find it, so we have it and we enjoy it and we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we have the intention that should be fuel for righteous action after. So this is praiseworthy. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would wear, and he gave the instructions to wear the best dress that you have on Jummah and on Eids, It doesn't mean you have to go out and buy new things and the expensive things, but the best that you have, use it. In another hadith, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala loves to see the athar of his ni'mah on his abd, the manifestation of his blessing on his slave, as a acknowledgement that Allah has favored us with these things, So in that context, that's not going to be blameworthy. That's going to be praiseworthy, in fact. And with the good intention, that becomes, as we say, and as the ulama have mentioned, that the biniyat as-salihah tuqlab al-'ada ibadah. With a proper and pious intention, the common custom, a custom becomes an act of worship. Sayyidina Sufyan al-Thawri, radiallahu anh, he has an interesting thing. He was known to be one of the great fuqaha and one of the great muhaddithin. He was also one of the very early, pioneers and examples, what we the sort of the fountainheads of suluk and this whole character building, and very well known as being a zahid, one who would abstain from the world. So what did that translate into? It translated into when he didn't make outward efforts to acquire it, but when he got it, he would enjoy it. And it's also mentioned that he liked good food, tasty, good food. At the same time, he used to carry with him in the journey, he used to carry faludaj. Faludaj is a type of sweet, which is made from, in the old days it was probably very simple, made of some sort of flour and perhaps some sort of sweetening of honey or natural sugar. They used to actually have a natural type of sugar in those days. So it was a very simple type of sweet, but that was considered a luxury, and he would carry that with him in the journey. And Ibrahim ibn Adam was also one of the pioneers and one of the great early ascetics, as it were. But how was his asceticism? He says, إذا وجدنا أكلنا أكل الرجال وإذا فقدنا صبرنا صبر الرجال. He says, if we found, in other words, if food was presented, good food even in fact, of course being halal, and of course away from all types of gluttony, but when good things were presented, then we would eat, the eating of the men. We would eat, and we'll do a tik-tok, right? He would go, and when the faqadna, and if we didn't have, sabatna sabra rijal, and if we didn't have it, which was most of the time, we would have patience, the patience that men should have. And so this was the outlook, And as I mentioned, the Prophet ﷺ, his sirah is replete from that, And he used to say, from your dunya, I love three things. Number one, women. That is the most beloved thing to the men, and that is a very wholesome thing in its proper context. And he was the first to acknowledge that, The Christian community, unfortunately, they came up with this, this kind of thing that, marital relationships, this is a kind of a lowly and despicable, and therefore the celibacy of the priests, they're not allowed to get married, which is quite unnatural. And as we mentioned, they came up with this themselves. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never forbid us from that. Man harrama zinat Allah allati akhraj li ibadi wa tayyibati min ar-rizq. Who, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks, has forbidden, the good things that I have brought forth for my slaves, and the good rizq, the good things which I have presented. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala further goes on to say, they are for the people of Iman in this world, and specifically, and other people also share in those things. People of Iman and people without Iman. But khalisatan yawm, but only and specifically and especially for the people of Iman in the hereafter. So to the extent that we utilize these things for their proper and intended purpose to sustain ourselves, to live a life of ubudiyah, then the utilization of them will be also considered an act of worship and also a pious action. And enjoying them, showing and expressing our thanks for that is also going to be a shukr. Shukr itself is a great maqam, it is a great position and station. However, if we go past those boundaries, or past that concept, and we make it our objective just to fulfill our desires, to live a life of continuous enjoyment, continuous entertaining, which is basically what 21st century is all about, right? So now we've lost the track. And now these same things which could have been means for piousness and felicity, these same things become means of distraction and being taken off the track. And therein it becomes a cursed proposition. So the dunya in and of itself, the things in and of themselves, are not praiseworthy or blameworthy. It is the actions and the utilization of the man, his characteristics and his utilization of these things, which makes the world either blameworthy or praiseworthy, his interaction with it. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to understand the world for what it is, and be among those who make their object the object for which we were created, to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and use this world to facilitate that and make us thankful slaves as well, and give us afiyat in an easy way. Nabi Sallallahu used to ask for ease, and he told us to ask for ease. Don't ask for difficulties. We can't bear that. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all tawfiq wa akhir da'wana. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.